No one cares about your brand. Every good advertising person should have a post-it note on their desk saying the customer does not give a shit, right?
Welcome to Herd Mentality, a podcast where we discuss how the power of audio moves minds and markets. I'm Brittany Rigby, Managing Editor at Little Black Book, and each episode I sit down with creative thinkers, marketers, and makers to explore how the world's most creative brands use audio to make people think, feel, and act. Today, I'm joined by someone who almost needs no introduction. Mark Ritson is a globally renowned brand consultant, marketing professor, columnist, and creator of the very popular mini MBAs in both marketing and brand management. He has a PhD in marketing. He has advised brands like Loewe, Subaru, and Sephora. He spent 13 years as the in-house brand consultant for LVMH. That's the world's biggest luxury group, housing the likes of Louis Vuitton and Dom Perignon. He has maxed out his LinkedIn connections because every man, woman, and their dog wants to hear what he says. And in my opinion, so they should. He's well worth listening to. Welcome.
Hello. What a pleasure.
I'm going to jump straight in. You unveiled research at CRA's recent Herd conference. You and Rob Britton studied 7 years of Effie's data to determine that spending 11% of a campaign's media dollars on audio significantly improved its effectiveness. The study stretches well beyond that, though, so I'm keen to know what your headlines are.
There's a few, we did it 2 years ago and found this 11% threshold. And I have to say, Rob does all the work. I just get on stage and tart it up with charts,
Best split of work.
Oh, no, really. Rob sits in his underpants with Excel and I take over on PowerPoint for the last 2 minutes where all the credit is given, That's how I like it. And the data, it's nice in a way. 2 years on, the threshold has been confirmed, which is great when every other media channel is kind of going, personalization, and a year later it's mass marketing, So the basic premise is, if you want growth, and who doesn't as a brand, you have to commit to excess share of voice, right? Which is one of our oldest and most supported concepts. So if the first point, never mind audio, if you really want to grow your share, you really have to invest money in media to do it. And there isn't any data to ever suggest that's not the case. So if this thing excess share of voice, how much more than your market share are you investing in share of voice? So if you're 10% share of market and you want 15% share of market, you're going to have to do basically an extra 5 points of share of voice. And as simple as that sounds, it's probably the most supported concept in marketing science. What we're saying is that's all true. When Rob has studied about 600 Aussie campaigns, that holds up beautifully. But if among that investment you include audio advertising, whether it be radio or podcasts or whatever, we see another additional boost. And that boost seems to come in most strongly from 11%, meaning a little sprinkling of audio does you no harm, but it doesn't get you the maximum value. Once you cross the 11% threshold, as many brands do, you see a really interesting synergy effect where everything works better. Not just the audio, but it seems to drive greater emotional response, bigger impacts on price, much better impacts on penetration. Just generally, it's a real catalyst for everything. And what I love about it, it's a real humble appeal. The audio guys probably don't like me saying it, but I like the idea that they're only asking for, just over double digits, maybe a bit more. But what we're saying is for that small shift of budget, which most Australian brands don't commit to, you're going to see a really sizable change in what the overall campaign does. So asking for a little, but getting a lot back. So it's a really nice thing to present.
I loved the finding around pricing sensitivity, which you mentioned briefly there, which suggests to me that campaigns with audio in them can help brands hold their margin at a point in time where it's really bloody tough economically.
You got it. For me, it's the most interesting finding, partly because we talk too much about sales and we talk too much about unit growth, right? And that's partly, we're going to give Ehrenberg Bass some credit later on, I'm sure. How brands grow is about growing sales volumes. And that's great, but not that important. The only reason we care about sales volumes is they're the carrier drug for profit. And sometimes we lose that point in Australia. You know, if you follow the sales volume, revenue signpost, you end up with more products and more brands, more sales promotions, but actually not necessarily doing the smart thing. If you follow the profit signpost, you have less products and less brands and less sales promotions, and you focus on price. You know, 30 years of research boiled down into 1 minute basically says, having studied thousands of industries, marketing scientists are certain that the biggest lever for profit, which is the only thing we should care about, is price. It's not volume, it's not cutting cost, it's your price. And so you're absolutely right. If we can find any levers which reduce price sensitivity and then get marketers to actually feel confident enough to increase or maintain price, we're in a very good place. And the data's very clear on audio. We don't know why, but if you reach that 11% threshold and you're investing in audio and you've got excess share of voice, marketers are reporting a much greater degree of price insensitivity from those campaigns. So you're absolutely right. It's a really important finding.
I wonder, for marketers who aren't currently spending that 11% and are likely to not be growing their marketing budgets, how do we start to shift spend around or reorient so that the 11% becomes more realistic?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's kind of two barrels in the message of growth. You know, when I talked on stage, it was kind of like we're all here for growth, which we are. There's no one in that room that was going, you know, oh, we'll be flat and it'll be okay, right? So the first point is you've got to accept that if you want growth, you really need to have an excess increased investment in media. And I see all the time CMOs, I literally would have met a dozen of them over the last couple of years that are like, yeah, we want growth, but no, I don't have any budget to spend more on media. So what I'm going to do is stretch my existing investment and cheat the laws of gravity, you know? And generally that doesn't work. Having said that, the message on the 11% of audio is it could be a partial cheat, so that if you can't invest more money, at least get the catalytic effect of audio in there, because it will make the existing amount go a little bit further. I'm not saying it makes up for having 10 points of excess share of voice, but you might as well enjoy the synergies from what you have. And there's no reason to suggest that wouldn't be the case.
You've used the word catalyst a lot in calling radio a catalyst, and you also called it beautiful data. Yeah. What makes it beautiful?
Look, there's a couple of things about it. It's very, first of all, I like the idea we've come back 2 years later to the same point. Now, actually, in media circles, and for these kind of upfront events, it's like, oh, there's no new message. And I'm like, I really like the lack of new message. I think clients will like it too. We've got enough of everyone coming up with a new pointed theme each year, right?
Consistency of message and a long-term idea. Who knew those worked?
Who knew that would work out, right? Even for, have a strategy for your strategy. So I really like that. And then the data is lovely because, look, I'm a big fan of econometrics. I've seen it work. I've worked on my own business. It does an amazing job. But it's a bloody complex process, because what you're doing with econometrics is going, understand everything and then kind of project forward with data. What would happen if we did that and that? And the reality is you can go down that path, and maybe you should. But the other option is just look at all the companies around you and what they've done instead. Because, we've taken basically 600 companies and we've gone, some of them have got excess share of voice and some of them have also got a bigger investment in audio. Let's compare them to the others and just see what we've learned. You know what I mean? That's why it's beautiful. There's a series of incredibly simple bar charts that go, in blue are companies that didn't invest in audio, and in red are companies that did. Look, there's 20 points of difference in emotional response. Now, there may be other variables going on, right? We're not doing regression analysis. But it's beautiful in the sense it's simple and it's meaningful, and I think it makes a great point.
The gap between audio and non-audio campaigns is really significant. Like there's
Huge.
An almost doubling of effectiveness, distinctiveness, emotional response. Why do you think that is? What is it about audio?
I think the paradox of audio is that on the one hand, because it's intangible, it's a real pain in the ass to sell it, because clients want to see, something on a screen, George Clooney, You know what I mean? A brand partnership, people on the street doing stuff. That's audio's weakness, right? We're literally selling air, But at the same time, flip it around to the consumer or listener, and the theater of dreams is an incredibly powerful arena to tell stories, to generate emotion, while people are genuinely in a, I don't want to say vulnerable, but accessible place. When you're driving in your car and bored out of your mind, radio saves your life. When you're trying to go to sleep at night, a podcast is like the most beautiful thing, right? And to have good ads inserted there is a special thing, right? So I think that the reason it's been hard to sell audio advertising to clients is the reason it actually is delivering, as you say, these really quite substantial impacts on important things like emotion and pricing and differentiation and penetration. I mean, if you could pick 4 things that a medium could do, my God, they'd be the 4, right?
You said that you've mentioned this already, but 2 years ago you presented this study for the first time. You've added 2 extra years of data on top of it. It must feel as thorough and rigorous as you and Rob Britton are, gratifying 2 years later to be like, that 11% has held true. Everything we knew 2 years ago still is right. It's still being borne out. Were there
Absolutely.
any surprises in those extra 2 years worth of data?
No, look, I think the actual effect, the audio guys were worried, if I'm honest with you, because the 11% threshold holds up very nicely. Its impact is slightly less than it was 2 years ago. But my point to them was, that's okay. It goes up and down. It will flow a little bit. This is a broad array of campaigns. But the main thing is, the message should stay the same to clients who, frankly, are holding a lot of complex thoughts in their heads, right? That if we can put, and it is a threshold, not an average. It isn't the target. Right? You could do more than 11%. But if you can get past the 11% threshold, you're likely to see these benefits. And that is not, it's not YouTube asking for your TV spend or TV saying, bring back your Google spend to us, right? These are big, seismic, games that big media are playing. It's a much more humble ask. Give us 11 points and see what it will do across the board. So, it's nice work to do. And for me, it's such a pleasure because I do some pretty strange things for money, right? But it's a pleasure to come in and do this one where you're like, I like the same message. I like the fact we've got more depth to it. I like the fact Rob's doing it. And Rob's straight, right? Rob's never going to compromise himself, right? So, it's very familiar. And I'm working with Charlie Murdoch, who I've worked with for a long time, and radio jobs. So for me, it's fun. It's fun.
I love that. 2 years ago, when you did present that research for the first time, I spoke to you after your keynote. And I asked you if you thought that marketers were going to jump up to 11% in response.
What did I say?
And you said you didn't think many would. You said it's in inches. The good thing about radio is we only need inches to have a massive impact.
Ain't that the truth?
Are we making any progress on the inches?
Well, look, I have checked. If I checked just when you were there before, and the general word is yes, but in inches, sure enough, right? But again, the nice thing when we did that original work was, first of all, you want to support radio and podcasts, right? They are the good guys. I mean, however you want to define it. We need a good national radio, vibrant network. So you do feel like you're doing God's work a bit. And they don't need a lot to be successful, right? We're not talking, again, about 40, 50%. So it did work. I was reliably told. They had Andrew Tyndall in last year, and that seemed to work as well. Though no one has given me any numbers, so... And that's the other frustration, right? The first thing I asked for was a list of brands that are past the 11% threshold and are really getting benefits from audio. And, of course, they can't do that because no brand wants to reveal any of this, even though when you look at the list, it's fantastic, right? So, there's some frustrations on what we can and can't say.
I wonder how we build creative ambition in the channel because it feels like when you're the medium that knows that maybe you won't be at the very center of a campaign and that a campaign might not be built around your channel, but you want 11% and it's a catalyst, it's a sidekick, all of these lovely words. How do we make sure that we're thinking about that channel as its own channel, making work that's fit for that channel and not viewing it as an afterthought?
There's two things. I think you've got to segment your market, right? There are a bunch of clients, and I would suggest the bigger ones, where it's really about carrying over a campaign, long-running campaign, into audio. And there ain't nothing wrong with that. That's literally the catalytic effect. The stuff you've seen elsewhere is playing out in audio as well, right? Nothing wrong with that. But to your question, I also think there's another segment who are probably spending more and are more dependent on audio for various reasons, where there is a different dramatical, creative agenda to make great radio. And I have to be honest with you at this point, having been a respectful POM, it's pretty bad here. If you think about the iconic audio advertising, it's not at the high creative bar that we might expect. And, this is going to go down really badly. If you go back and visit some of the other key markets, the Dutch for sure, from what I understand, but certainly the British, right? If you listen to an afternoon listening to classic FM reveals a whole different world of audio creative where these brands have really, really thought about it and are using the theatre of imagination for their, the spaces are being used to conjure images. I think there's a lot to be said for us gazing outside of Australia, where we tend to be, hello, and on we go from there. Reminder advertising to a place where we really can have big, big impact audio advertising. So yeah, I think looking further afield would be good. I spent a lot of time in America. I don't think the Americans are much progressed past the Australians on that one, but the Europeans seem to have it. My French is too bad to follow much French advertising, certainly audio advertising. But the Brits have got that still.
Audio has the power to light a fire in you. It also has the power to literally put one out.
We've been talking about a long-term idea, long-term effects, letting something compound over time. And the research, unsurprisingly, showed that campaigns that run for a year or more do far better than short-term campaigns. There's so much movement in market. There's a lot of great marketers out of jobs. There's a lot of great marketers getting into brand new jobs, setting up what their visions can be, they want them to be. How do you get buy-in early, and why is it still so hard to get buy-in, to invest in and then stick to a long-term thing?
It's a great question. I mean, of all the things you see in this data and most other data, it's duration that is really the superpower of a good campaign. And I don't mean 60-second versus 30-second spots. I mean, to your point, if you run, in our study here, if you go past 52 weeks, you see a significant boost. And the average audio campaign in Australia is 4 weeks long, right? So literally do it 10 times longer for more impact. And we see that in other media too. The sweet spot for most ads appears to be around 3 years. Now, when I say that, I'm not saying run the same ad for 3 years. I might be saying that in some cases. I'm saying a campaign, a recurring theme, spec savers, So maybe different executions, but it's a long-running, theme. There's two challenges there, and both challenges can be resolved with market orientation. The first thing is marketers are useless because they spend 3 or 4 months on a campaign, building it, testing it, devising it, and then they launch it. And of course, they're thoroughly sick of it at that point. But they've had one ad in their head for 3 months. With a little bit of market orientation, they would realize, first, the customer's not paying any attention to the ad at all. And second, they have 9,000 other fucking ads going on in their heads at the same time. Ergo, you're bored with it as the brand manager because that's all you've thought about for 3 months. But you now need to let that thing cook for months, if not years, for full effect, right? That's the first thing. And then to your question, in that 2 to 3 year period, it is highly likely that the marketing team will switch out. Again, market orientation. Don't come in and put your fresh stamp on it because that's stupid, right? the first thing you do is look to whether or not the campaign is testing well, understand the duration point, and the greatest signal you have a good brand manager is she comes into the job and goes, yeah, it's looking pretty good. We'll just run it. Yeah. She doesn't need some triumphant moment where she sacks the agency and brings in her new mates and they start a new brief. It's a complete lack of market orientation that's driving that. And I think if there's one hill I'm prepared to die on in the next 24 months, it's this point about duration, that we are taking our cakes out the oven too early and that we should put them back in. Now, the caveat is if you've got a shit ad, it will stay a shit ad. Pull it. But if you've got a good ad and if the campaign is working, let it keep going. Which again, coming back to this data we have is why I'm delighted to be back 2 years later with the same message. Right?
I heard one creative boss talk about it recently as we're spending too much time thinking about our clients in terms of categories and not enough in terms of culture, because you're not just thinking about your health insurer.
That's right.
At night, you're thinking about all of the million things that you think about.
You got it.
And at some point, if you are scrolling Instagram and you see, your mate's engagement post and then a healthcare ad, that's in the context of your wider life. So it doesn't really matter if you're doing great for the category, but it's still not great for consumers ultimately.
No, that's huge. Absolutely right. If you really, we build a lot of portraits of target customers, right? Not the bullshit ones, with the smiling people, but with the proper ones built from data. I work a lot with a couple of American companies where we use synthetic data now to build them. And what's interesting with synthetic data, which doesn't have all the biases of, humans building stuff, is it absolutely gets this point. And it goes, right, if you're selling cocktail sausages, the portrait has 1 or 2 sentences about cocktail sausages and then talks about everything else in the context of the consumer's life. And at first you're like, hang on a minute, it's about cocktail sausages. And you go, no, it's not about cocktail sausages. It's the context of life in which your product plays a tiny, tiny role. I worked for one of the big banks for years. And what we discovered was, instead of telling people, hey, move your mortgage because of A, B, and C, it was about targeting and targeting in terms of time rather than who. There were 4 or 5, you will change your bank if you're statistically representative probably 3 times in your life, none of which will be driven by the banks. It will be driven by a change of state. It will be driven by a new partner. It will be driven by the exit of a partner. And that's about it. And so the trick is realizing the portrait for a consumer in financial services is about who they married to, when are they married, who will die, when they will die, when will they move state. It's got nothing to do with banking because consumers don't give a fuck about banks. They care about moving to a new place or marrying a new person. And then that's what triggers it. And I think that's the ultimate implication of market orientation on so many levels, is realizing your brand is not important and it is not the central character in the consumer's life. The minute you understand that, in my experience, I've trained thousands of brand managers, the starting point is no one cares about your brand. To use Sarah Carter's point, the great ad planner from DDB, every good advertising person should have a post-it note on their desk saying the customer does not give a shit, right? So many things flow from that. Salience, defining competitors, understanding the centrality of your brand, advertising wear out. It really is the beginning of better brand management and better advertising.
That made me think maybe that links back to radio in a weird way, in that radio is one of those channels that feels like when it's on,
yes,
it's part of the texture of your life.
It's an ambient medium.
It's not a distraction or an interruption in the same way that other media can be.
If you talk about the most important recent discovery in marketing is the 95-5 rule, right? John Doerr's idea that, supported by data, that in any market, B2B or B2C, 95% of your customers are not in market right now. They are part of your target, but they've already had a haircut. They've already bought their insurance for the year. They've got a new car, right? You still want to talk to them because when they need a new haircut or a new car and they enter the 5%, it's too late to reach them most of the time with targeted product messages. Then 70-80% of the time, the brand that they have salience for is the one they will buy. Radio and audio speaks directly to that in the sense we can just keep beating that ambient drum so that when at some point you enter the 5%, you've created that long-term message. Now, the great challenge here is when that consumer then turns up and makes the purchase in the 5%, the performance media will take the credit, even though most of it has been set up by the brand building media doing all the hard yards, which then, particularly in the case of audio, is completely invisible to the naked eye.
What should a marketer do in response to this research? And I know the answer is
I think there's
invest 11%.
Or more,
or
more. It could be more. Yeah, look. Let's not be too directional. I mean, I'm sure my sponsors for the day would like us to say, invest. Well, look. First of all, accept excess share of voice. Second, make sure some of it is in audio, and ideally, third, make sure it's beyond the 11% threshold. I think more generally, though, speaking for audio and other media, just employ the concept of media neutrality, which we've completely forgotten about in our industry, right? We've just done some research on a number of markets, including Australia. We've surveyed a representative bunch of marketers to see how much they actually know about marketing. And the not surprising insight is not very much at all. One of the things that 2/3 of marketers don't know is, what does media neutrality mean? They literally don't know, along with above the line and penetration and all kinds of other things. You wouldn't believe it. Media neutrality is, a 25-year-old concept, but what it basically says is, don't have any favorite children as you go into each annual year of planning. Open your mind to everything. And then don't have any pre-allocated investment amounts. Go into each season thinking about what would be best for your brand at that time. And I think media like audio benefit from that because the data is strong. The preconceptions are, unfortunately, pretty oppositional. So I think just being media neutral, listen to the data. And when a medium like audio comes along and says, 11%, you've got the opportunity to try it without, taking much risk. And the data I've presented is pretty clear that it will benefit because ironically it's making all the other shit work better as well.
Last question.
Yeah.
The question that I've been ending every episode with.
Yes.
Favorite or a favorite piece of sonic branding, jingle, radio advertising?
Oh, that's tricky. That's tricky. So my favorite sonic branding cue of all. It's so cliched though. But yeah, I've got to say.
What popped to mind?
Well, it's Netflix and the dumb. I mean.
Why did I know you were going to say that?
I think because most people say that. I was going to try and find something cool, right? And it's like, no. Go with what works and go with the mass, right? And I'll tell you something. Tyndall did all that great work on the FE database out of the States. And
when you've been saying Tyndall, by the way, we're talking Andrew Tyndall.
Not
from
Tinder,
System
the dating
1.
app. I should make that clear to my wife and anyone else that's listening. Not like Tinder. So Andrew Tyndall's probably the up-and-coming great voice of marketing in the world. He's still in his 20s, you know what I mean? But don't tell him I said that. It'll go straight to his head. So Tyndall's work has been really good. He's got into a whole bunch of really good data sets, one of them being the FEs. And he's really looked at distinctive brand assets, fluency, this idea of how do we get consumers to know that it's us? Because usually they don't. And what his work conclusively shows is both the quantity and quality of your distinctive brand assets is key. On the quantity side, you need to, in any form of ad, get to 7 DBAs in order to ensure you're in that top quartile of distinctive advertising, so the consumer knows it's you. And you think about 7, but that's a great lesson, right? Most of us are undercooking our ads. And then the second thing is it depends on those DBAs. And what he shows is the most powerful assets to use are mostly sonic. Yeah, back to the dumb. That sonic anchor or sonic cue or jingle, those two things are pretty much at the top. And it's really interesting why, right? If you look at, and I don't understand this, so I'm going to bullshit my way around a bit, but it's true. If you look at the structure of the brain, physiologically, the memory centers have a clearer pathway to most of the other senses before they get to the visual cortex. So although we're obsessed with visual cues and logos and colors and Pantons, they're actually the long way around to memory. And smell and sound are much more proximate and much more likely to cue memory. Yeah. So it speaks again to a big advantage of audio it's not just that you should codify your audio advertising. Those distinctive, codes, those distinctive brand assets are gonna power through much better, much more easily than some of the more visual stuff that we have a bias to. So, and again, hello, I'm going to say some tiles. The horrendous Bunnings jingle. These are all perfect examples, as is da-dum. You know where you are straight away, right?
You know where you are. I love that. Thank you very much.
My
Mark.
pleasure. What a nice pleasure to be in your black book briefly.
If you're a brand looking to connect with Australians, there's no better place than Aussie Radio and Audio. It reaches more than 15 million people every week and truly is where brands are heard. Head to cra.au to get started. See you next time.